The mismanagement of the DC IP prior to the formation of DC Studios led to some of the worst creative and executive decisions ever made for a major franchise. The level of incompetence during the DCEU era was mind-boggling, and it sadly wasn't limited to live-action projects. You'd constantly hear about projects getting scrapped in the animation and gaming division as well. Now, there have been a lot of canceled DC movies, shows, and video games over the years, and we'd be here all day if I were to go over all of them. But I thought it'd be interesting to highlight a handful of the biggest or most notorious scrapped / rejected projects in the past 20 years or so, many of which had already seen a decent amount of development or progress before they got the axe, and to explore how much potential was left on the table and how much they could have greatly benefited the perception of the DC brand or specific characters if they were successful. One of the biggest examples of this in recent years is the situation regarding the single-player Wonder Woman game that was developed by Monolith Productions, the same development studio behind Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. The game was announced during the 2021 Game Awards with a reveal trailer that didn't really showcase any details about the game, just that it was in development. This was a big deal because, surprisingly, Wonder Woman has never received her own video game of any kind. No AAA title, no LEGO game, mobile game, or even a title on one of the older systems like the Nintendo 64 or something. The premise would have been Circe invading the island of Themyscira, leading an army of Cyclopses, Gorgons, and other monsters. Medusa and Cheetah would have also played major roles in the story. The game would have had the player engage in fast-paced free-flow combat, utilizing Wonder Woman's iconic weaponry like her lasso of truth. Throughout the course of the narrative, Diana would have to repair her relationship with her Amazon sisters and her mother Hippolyta, as they were hurt by her decision to leave the island years prior to the events of the game. Themyscira would have been an open-world map where you get to fly around in. A big problem with the initial announcement was that years went by without any major updates. This was largely because the game was still in very early development when it was first announced, and its inclusion at the 2021 Game Awards was more so intended to attract new talent for the studio. The core leadership group for Monolith left the studio after a game they were working on based on an original IP was cancelled by Warner Brothers. Monolith got the go-ahead by WB to make a game centered on Wonder Woman in spring 2021, but the game was announced December that same year.
When Wonder Woman was announced, that was nothing. Literally, I mean, if you look at the timeline here, they start working on this game, or they take over this game in April, May, June-ish of 2021. They announce it 6 months later, which I think that probably happened for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was hey, Warner, we need to light a fire because we need to actually get something shipped here, because Monolith hasn't actually shipped anything in 4 years now, and they are starting from scratch.
Another noteworthy feature that was going to be incorporated in the game was the Nemesis system, a game mechanic where NPCs would remember your choices and actions from previous encounters and evolve accordingly. Initially, the Wonder Woman game was going to do something different with the Nemesis system, having it so that Diana could form allies and friendships with this mechanic rather than enemies. This idea was scrapped, and the game had actually rebooted development, switching game directors in early 2024 to adopt more of a traditional Nemesis system. By that point, the game had already garnered over $100 million in development costs. Comic writer Gail Simone was brought in to be a long-term consultant for the game, due to her having written a well-renowned run on the character. We really could have gotten a modern AAA title on Wonder Woman that had the potential to feed generations, but WB Games said, "Nah." In February 2025, it was officially announced that the Wonder Woman game was cancelled with the shutdown of Monolith Productions. Since the news broke out, there have been some misconceptions when it comes to who was actually responsible for the cancellation. Some people like to point fingers at James Gunn or DC Studios when they had nothing to do with this. The shutdown of Monolith resulted from decisions made by the president of WB Games, JB Perrette, and it wasn't the only studio to be closed off. Player First Games and WB Games San Diego were among the three that were targeted as well. This was part of a new initiative to restructure the WB Games division to focus more on their proven successes. The whole situation is really unfortunate, and it's bizarre how WB didn't utilize the success of the 2017 Wonder Woman movie by using the character more in outside media and greenlighting more projects surrounding her mythos. Imagine Wonder Woman having her own equivalent Arkham series, multiple action and adventure titles that immerses new audiences to her lore, which isn't often explored, while showcasing her vast abilities in a unique combat mechanic. One can only hope that another studio in the future decides to tackle the character.
Oh, a man can dream, though. A man can dream.
But the situation with Wonder Woman sadly isn't the only occurrence of a major DC AAA title being scrapped. The second most notable instance is arguably what happened to the Batman Beyond game that was being developed by WB Games Montreal, the developers of Arkham Origins. The project was codenamed Project Sabbath, and the game was supposed to take place in the Arkhamverse, specifically 10 years after the events of Arkham Knight. It would have featured Damian Wayne as the main playable Batman operating in a more rundown version of Gotham. Our former principal artist at WB Montreal shared some of the design concepts for an older Bruce Wayne, as well as models for both the Damian Wayne and the Huntress. We also got some potential 3D renditions of villains like Killer Croc. This sort of lines up with the concept art that was shared years ago featuring an older Bruce in a batsuit, which also revealed potential designs for other villains such as Two-Face, Poison Ivy, a female Black Mask, Gorilla Grodd, and an old version of the White Rabbit. The Bat Cycle would have been the main method of traversing the city besides the standard glide mechanic, replacing the Batmobile from Arkham Knight. Another former WB Montreal artist posted a video last year of the game's early development stage where 3D models from Arkham Origins were used to test certain assets like Batman's cape. It's also been speculated that the game would have featured the Nemesis system. Ultimately, the project was scrapped or rebooted in favor of the Gotham Knights co-op game that was released in 2022, where you play as the Bat family in the wake of Batman's death. The shift to Gotham Knights was due to a mandate by the studio execs for WB Montreal to make a new franchise surrounding the Batman universe, according to the creative director of Gotham Knights, Patrick Redding.
The serious answer to that question, in fact, is that, when we got a mandate to start a new franchise built around Gotham City, built around the Batman universe, right away we knew one of the things we wanted to be different was for players to have an extended period of growth and evolution for their character, for their hero. Because they'd be going out night after night and fighting crime. It wasn't going to be sort of a one and done scenario. It was going to be something that would unfold in a lot of different ways.
Jason Schreier, who is a very reliable games journalist and broke the news of everything that went down with the Wonder Woman game, confirmed that Rocksteady is currently working on a new single-player Batman game. We don't know any details relating to whether or not it's another Arkham game or if they want to start a new universe entirely. Even if it is a reboot, I'd bet money it'll be more of a traditional Arkham game in terms of its gameplay, given WB Games restructuring last year to focus more on their best-selling IP. And if you're asking me, the best way for them to get a guaranteed lick back after their last game flopped would be to utilize the appeal of Batman Beyond and make a game centered on Terry McGinnis set in a futuristic Gotham. If a game like that were to turn out good, I swear they would print money. When it comes to WB's handling of Batman Beyond, they didn't just fumble on the gaming side of things. In recent years, it's been revealed that they didn't go forward with a pitch for an animated movie centered on Terry McGinnis' Batman. Around September 2023, one of the members of the visual development team that worked on the Spider-Verse movies pitched to WB alongside Patrick Harpin a Batman Beyond animated feature. They had been trying to pitch their way up to the company in hopes of getting into contact with DC Studios and James Gunn. According to one of the visual artists for Spider-Verse, WB warned him beforehand that there was no way they could do a Beyond movie, but they loved the enthusiasm from the people that pitched. After the outline for the movie was showcased, apparently a hard no turned into a maybe, which is what the concept art circulating a couple years ago was referencing. If WB wanted their answer to Spider-Verse, similar to how TMNT Mutant Mayhem was inspired by those movies with its art style, I think this would be the best way to tackle it, especially if one of the artists from the Spider-Verse movies is practically begging on his knees to work on a Batman Beyond project. The neon futuristic Gotham aesthetic would work really well in that art style as seen by the concept art. I don't know how someone could look at this art and not think this is one of the toughest concepts made. With how DC Studios operates when it comes to accepting certain pitches from creatives, I really do hope a pitch meeting can occur at some point or that conversations have already taken place, because this would be a really cool Elseworlds movie to release in theaters. A movie like Clayface, for example, only exists because Mike Flanagan came in with a really good pitch for a Clayface horror movie, which Gunn and company liked enough to give him the go-ahead to write a full script. Once that was done and deemed satisfactory, they went ahead and gave her the green light. It's set in the DCU, but it wasn't a part of James Gunn and Peter Safran's initial plan.
Clayface was not something that we didn't come into this job like with Woman of Tomorrow or Lanterns, both things we talked about when we had our initial writers room. We knew those things were coming. Clayface was not on our on our checklist. Mike came in with a pitch for Clayface that was like, whoa. And then he wrote the screenplay and fulfilled doubly on that
Right.
promise. So it really is about, like, it's just a great horror movie.
I've talked about the Batgirl movie a handful of times in the past, but it'd be weird for me not to mention it here, considering how far into development it was before it was officially cancelled. Originally, Joss Whedon was going to write, direct, and produce a standalone Batgirl movie set in the DCEU. It was going to be based on Barbara Gordon's first appearance in Detective Comics issue 359, which depicts her origin and her first encounter with Killer Moth. About a year later, Whedon left the project because it apparently took him months to realize he didn't have a story for it. Less than a couple of months later, news broke that Christina Hodson was writing a new screenplay. Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah were hired to direct in 2021. They previously directed things like Bad Boys for Life and a couple of episodes of Ms. Marvel. The movie would have starred Leslie Grace as Batgirl, and it was supposed to release after The Flash, as the original ending of that movie would have established Michael Keaton as the Bruce Wayne of the DCEU after Barry returns to the present day, which is why his Batman would have been in Batgirl alongside J.K. Simmons as Jim Gordon instead of Ben Affleck. The villains would have been a mob boss played by Jacob Scipio and Firefly played by Brendan Fraser. When the movie had finished shooting and entered post-production, it was officially canned by the new leadership at WB as the merger with Discovery was finalized a few months prior. Their new strategy was to no longer prioritize big budget films meant for streaming and find new ways to save costs. The Batgirl movie was set to release on HBO Max with a budget of close to $90 million. Insiders claimed that Batgirl didn't fit the new commitment to making future DC titles big theatrical event films. You gotta feel bad for the directors because they couldn't even get a hold of any of the footage they filmed as they were blocked from the servers. They learned about the cancellation from a New York Post article during one of the director's own wedding.
That's cold.
The story would have followed Barbara uncovering a conspiracy tied to Gotham's criminal underworld and trying to take down Firefly. Batman and Batgirl would have formed a partnership, with Batman giving her a new suit at the end of the movie. Whether or not this movie would have been good, I couldn't tell you because none of us have seen the final product, and it'll probably never see the light of day. I heard the test screenings didn't go so well, but those aren't definitive indicators of how a movie will turn out once it's complete. But it is insane how they canceled an entire movie that was shot and already in post-production just to save some money. In 2008, a third-party video game developer named Bottle Rocket Entertainment was working on an open-world Flash video game inspired by GTA and Tony Hawk's Skater Pro. They were hired by Brash Entertainment after the publisher acquired the license to make a video game on the Flash. The game would have centered on Wally West protecting both Keystone and Central City, saving civilians from things like spontaneous hazards and bank robberies, all while finding the fastest path to save them. It would have had an original story written by comic writer Marv Wolfman. The main villain of the game was the Reverse Flash, and there would have been appearances of other notable villains like Mirror Master, Captain Cold, Gorilla Grodd, Weather Wizard, and Abracadabra. There was also a planned multiplayer component where you and your friends could play as other speedsters like Jay Garrick, Max Mercury, XS, Jesse Quick, and even Superman to race one another or complete objectives. The game publisher Brash Entertainment was forced to declare bankruptcy and shut down after releasing a few expensive titles that lost the company a lot of money, which meant there was no more support for the Flash title. Bottle Rocket was about a year and a half away from completing the game, and issues arose when it came to character rights. Brash Entertainment purchased the rights to make a Flash game from DC, which meant that if another publisher wanted to acquire said rights to allow Bottle Rocket to continue their work, they'd have to give money to Brash. The problem was that nobody wanted to give money to a publisher that had already filed for bankruptcy and was about to shut down, and WB wanted to play the waiting game for the rights to revert back. Bottle Rocket was forced to close in 2009 as they couldn't acquire the necessary funding to keep them afloat. Sadly, this isn't the only instance of a Flash game being cancelled. Not much is known about the project, but apparently WB Montreal was working on a Flash title before it was scrapped in 2023 due to the underwhelming performance of the Flash movie. Many of you might be familiar with the Justice League movie that had a completed script, an entire cast of actors locked, costumes made, and was only weeks away from filming before it was officially cancelled. The movie was titled Justice League Mortal, and WB wanted it to be the start of a new universe that would lead to future solo projects on other characters. Michelle and Kieran Mulroney sent in a draft script to WB in 2007, and the studio was apparently happy with what was written. However, the studio wanted to rush production so that they could get things up and running before the 2007 writer's strike, which began in November that same year. George Miller was hired to direct, and casting went underway, with the main lineup being DJ Katrona as Superman, Armie Hammer as Batman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, the rapper Common as Jon Stewart Green Lantern, Adam Brody as Barry Allen Flash, Hugh Keys-Byrne as Martian Manhunter, and Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman. The writer's strike delayed production, but once it was over, the movie was set to start filming in Australia, hoping to seek a 40% refund on production costs. However, the Australian government didn't want to give WB the the 40% tax rebate because, I kid you not, the movie didn't star enough Australian actors in their eyes.
Huh?
Mind you, by that point, the movie was already estimated to have a $220 million budget, so the studio wasn't really trying to take the risk with a lower rebate percentage. The production kept getting pushed further and further back, to the point where Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight had already been released in theaters. Its success essentially gave WB cold feet about pursuing Justice League Mortal any further. What's currently going on with the Batman universe by Matt Reeves being separate from James Gunn's interconnected universe was pretty much gonna happen back in 2009. The Dark Knight trilogy was going to be completely disconnected from the Justice League movie, and you would have had two theatrical Batman simultaneously. But after that movie made over $1 billion and the delays in production for Justice League Mortal, WB decided to prioritize solo movies on characters and cancel the movie entirely. The story would have taken elements from Tower of Babel, where Batman's contingency plans to incapacitate the League are used against them, and the arcs leading up to Infinite Crisis, like in Countdown to Infinite Crisis, where Batman created the Brother Eye satellite to keep tabs on metahumans. Maxwell Lord and Talia al Ghul would have been the main antagonists. They take control of Brother Eye and have access to Batman's contingencies to use against the League. The fight between Wonder Woman and Superman in Wonder Woman issue 219 would have been adapted as well. Maxwell Lord in the movie would have used his telepathy to mind control Superman instead of fighting Wonder Woman, just like in the comic issue, only this time, after Wonder Woman uses her lasso on him to try and figure out how to stop Superman, to which Maxwell Lord answers that killing him would be the only way to stop him controlling Superman. Instead of Wonder Woman believing there was no other choice to stop him, killing him right then and there, Batman appears from behind to snap Maxwell Lord's neck. Okay. And apparently he ran a superhero themed restaurant chain called Planet Krypton, to which he injected nanobots into the Maxwell Lord special chef sauce to eventually turn civilians into OMAC robots, and the restaurant chain had served over 1 million people. Barry Allen would have sacrificed himself by reaching the vanishing point of the Speed Force in order to destroy the strongest version of the OMAC after becoming its host. Wally West would take up the Flash mantle and join the Justice League at the end. The whole script leaked sometime in 2013, so you can read more about the narrative and plot details if you're interested. There are a ton more to go over, but those are just a handful of the biggest cases of DC properties being cancelled in the past 2 decades or so that made a substantial amount of progress before getting the boot, along with a rejected pitch. These are often some of the most brought up in conversation surrounding missed opportunities due to WB's sheer and utter incompetence. It's interesting to think about how things would have gone differently had things worked out for some of these projects. What would the landscape of superhero movies look like if DC had beaten Marvel to the punch in making an interconnected cinematic universe? Would the release of the Wonder Woman game convince studio heads to develop more games on other characters who aren't Batman related had it been a success? Would the Batgirl movie have tarnished DC's reputation any more than The Flash or other films released around that time? All we can hope now is that the current leadership has learned from the mistakes from the previous regime and now has a solid plan across all platforms to create projects that actually benefit the IP instead of giving it a bad name for years to come.